the brutal final moments of history's most feared dictators. History remembers dictators for the terror they imposed, but rarely for the way they were forced to face their own end. From Saddam Hussein, dragged from a hidden bunker and led to the gallows, to Benito Mussolini, captured in disguise and shot before his body was hung in a public square, to Nicolae Ceausescu, executed by firing squad on Christmas Day as his own country rose against him. Their final moments were as chaotic and brutal as the regimes they built. These were men who once controlled armies, secret police, and entire nations. Yet in the end, they stood isolated, powerless, and at the mercy of the people they had ruled through fear. In this video, we trace the path from absolute authority to violent downfall, and step by step, uncover what really happened in the last days and executions of three of history's most infamous dictators. Saddam Hussein, Benito Mussolini, and Nicolae Ceausescu each ruled their nations with overwhelming power. Yet all three met brutal, chaotic, and unforgettable deaths. Their downfalls were not dignified. They were not quiet. They were not heroic. Instead, each leader's final hours revealed the raw collapse of systems built on fear, lies, and absolute authority. These executions weren't just the end of three dictators. They were the violent breaking points of entire nations pushed to their limits. Saddam Hussein's rise began long before the American search teams hunted him through the deserts of Iraq. Born in 1937 in a poor village, Saddam grew up surrounded by hardship. His father was absent, his mother harsh, and Iraq itself was in turmoil. These early struggles forged the personality he carried throughout his life, a relentless desire to dominate and a belief that only power could protect him. By the time Saddam seized full control of Iraq in 1979, this mindset had solidified into the cornerstone of his rule. His regime relied on fear, brutal crackdowns, and an intricate network of loyalists. Political opponents vanished into torture chambers. Families learned to stay silent, and Saddam seemed unshakable. But war after war weakened his grip on the nation. His invasion of Iran in 1980 led to 8 years of devastation. The use of chemical weapons against civilians, mass displacement, economic collapse. These left scars that would last generations. Then came the 1990 invasion of Kuwait, followed by the disastrous Gulf War. International sanctions pushed Iraq deeper into suffering. By the early 2000s, Saddam's regime was heavily isolated, increasingly paranoid, and closer to collapse than it appeared. When the United States invaded Iraq in March 2003, the Iraqi military crumbled quickly. Baghdad fell in April. Saddam disappeared. For months, he moved through safe houses, abandoned farms, and loyal tribal networks. American forces launched thousands of raids but always arrived just a step too late. That changed on December 13, 2003. Operation Red Dawn, backed by precise intelligence and relentless pursuit, finally cornered Saddam near his hometown of Tikrit. Hidden inside a camouflaged spider hole, he was pulled from the ground looking exhausted, disheveled, and stunned. The man who had once ruled with absolute authority now sat silently in custody, unable to resist. Saddam's trial, broadcast to millions, became a global spectacle. The charges focused on the Dujail massacre of 1982, when Saddam ordered the execution and imprisonment of over 100 men and boys after an assassination attempt. Witnesses testified about torture, disappearances, and destroyed homes. Saddam shouted in defiance, arguing the trial was politically motivated, but the evidence was overwhelming. On November 5, 2006, he was sentenced to death. The execution took place at dawn on December 30, 2006. A leaked cell phone video showed his final moments, shouting matches, taunts, and the sudden drop of the platform. It was not a controlled or dignified execution. It was chaotic, emotional, and deeply divisive. For some, it was justice. For others, revenge. What is certain is that it marked the violent end of a long chapter in Iraq's history. While Saddam's execution happened under formal procedures, Benito Mussolini's end was one of the most chaotic and public deaths any dictator has ever faced. Mussolini had once been celebrated by thousands, hailed as Il Duce, Italy's strongman ruler. But by 1943, after disastrous military defeats and economic collapse, he had become a liability to his own government. The fascist Grand Council voted to remove him, and he was arrested by order of King Victor Emmanuel III. A German commando raid rescued Mussolini months later, but it was a brief return. He was installed as the puppet leader of the Italian Social Republic, with no real power and a collapsing army. By April 1945, Nazi Germany was falling apart, and Italian partisans were taking control of northern towns. Mussolini fled Milan with his mistress, Clara Petacci, disguised as a German soldier. Their convoy headed toward the Swiss border, but partisans stopped the trucks at the town of Dongo. Mussolini tried to hide, silent and pale under a German helmet, but he was recognized immediately. His arrest shocked even the partisans who found him. Italy's once fearsome dictator reduced to a frightened, defeated man. He spent his last night imprisoned in a farmhouse. The next day, April 28, 1945, partisan leader Walter Audisio arrived with orders for immediate execution. Mussolini and Petacci were taken to the small village of Giulino de Mezzegra. Mussolini faced the wall without resistance. Petacci screamed and clung to him, refusing to step aside. At 4:10 p.m., a burst of gunfire ended both their lives. But the violence didn't end there. Their bodies were transported to Milan and dumped in Piazzale Loreto, the same square where Mussolini had executed anti-fascist prisoners months earlier. A furious crowd beat, spat on, kicked, and shot the corpses. Eventually, Mussolini, Petacci, and several fascist officials were hung upside down from a metal beam at a gas station. Photographs of the scene remain among the most disturbing images of World War II's aftermath. It was a brutal, symbolic act of vengeance from a population scarred by dictatorship and war. Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu's deaths in Romania would echo this same explosive fury. For 24 years, the Ceausescus ruled Romania through oppression, propaganda, and fear. Nicolae built a cult of personality rivaling North Korea's, while Elena, despite questionable qualifications, rose to high government office. Romania struggled under extreme austerity, food shortages, and severe censorship. But in December 1989, protests in Timișoara ignited a revolution. Ceausescu attempted to regain control with a mass rally in Bucharest, but when the crowd finally booed him on live television, a moment unimaginable months earlier, his regime collapsed in hours. He and Elena fled by helicopter, were captured, and handed over to the army. A rushed military tribunal sentenced them to death in less than an hour. On December 25, 1989, they were led into a courtyard and executed by firing squad. The soldiers fired so many rounds that their bodies were nearly torn apart. Footage of their deaths was broadcast across Romania, marking the definitive end of the dictatorship. 3 dictators. 3 regimes built on fear. 3 endings marked by chaos, violence, and the collapse of everything they once controlled. Their executions didn't erase the suffering they caused, but they became unforgettable moments in the history of nations that had endured decades of oppression.